of the Pew Bibles. A branch from Jesse. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of power, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears. But with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash round his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Thanks be to God.
Let's pray. Gracious God, may we know your presence with us. May we recognize your voice. Know it is you speaking. Listen and respond. Amen. He has come. He has come to lead the nation. Some say he is sly. Some say he is slippery. Some say he cannot be trusted. Is this the kind of leader that people hoped for? Is this the kind of leader that people fear? Who is he? The year is 730 BC, and I am talking about the leader of the nation, King Ahaz of Judah. King Ahaz of Judah. That's around the time our reading is set. And King Ahaz has got a difficult job on his hands. He is the king of a nation that has now been split apart. He's king in the southern part, in Judah, not the northern part, Israel. And he's king at a time where he's facing threat on his borders, threat from his neighbors, and he doesn't know what to do. So he decides he'll try and form an alliance. He'll find a way of coping. He'll look to the Assyrians who are the dominant empire of the day. They're the ones who will bail him out. He'll look to them, even though they are ruthless and volatile. He'll look to them, even though this surely will go wrong at some stage. Because if Star Wars has taught us anything, and it has taught us many things, it has certainly taught us that the empire strikes back. Now, the thing is, King Ahaz, he didn't get a chance to watch Star Wars. He won't get a chance to see the new one when it comes out at the end of this week. But he didn't need to watch Star Wars to know that the empire strikes back, because he had the prophet of Isaiah right there with him, living in Jerusalem, saying to him, look, what are you doing? What are you doing? Don't trust in the Assyrians. Trust in God. Persevere with God. But you can read what happens in 2 Kings 16. Ahaz decides not to listen. And in 2 Kings 16, verse 8, he takes the gold and the silver out of the temple and the royal treasury, and he sends it as a gift to the king of Assyria. He sells out. He plays it safe. He hedges his bets. He cuts a deal. And he makes Judah a vassal state to the Assyrian Empire. This is a disappointing king. This is a disappointing leader. And Isaiah is a disappointed prophet. There's rather a lot going on in our world at the moment. I wonder if you've noticed. Donald Trump looks like he's going to be impeached. We had an election this week. We have a new government. We've seen the pictures from New Zealand of the deadly volcanic eruption. Greta Thunberg was named Times Person of the Year. Lots going on. I wonder what stood out for you. For me, with all that's happened in recent days, there's just one image that has stood out above it all. One image that has captured my imagination, and I hope that you've seen it too. Ian, can I borrow you? Stick it up here. This is remarkably difficult to do, I've got to say. Who else saw the banana duct taped to the wall? What do you reckon? Another one? It's going to come down, isn't it? Brilliant, thanks Ian, there it is. The banana duct taped to the wall. This was a marvellous bit of artwork that's been done by Maurizio Catalan. And it's a bit of performance art. He duct taped a banana to the wall. And he sold it for $120,000. Ian and I will sell you that for less than half of that. And the thing is that once he'd done it and the news got out, of course, crowds swarmed to the gallery in Miami to see the banana that was duct taped to the wall. And until last weekend, last Saturday, when another artist came along and ate the banana. And on one level, I want to say, I think Maurizio Catalan is my new artistic role model. He's a genius. You see, I don't know about you, but I'm no artist. I can't paint, I can't draw, I can't dance or write great poetry. But do you know what? With Ian, I can stick fruit to walls with duct tape. It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. And the thing is, of course, the point is not that we now go out and stick fruit to walls. The point that Catalan is making is it's a parody of art that is pretentious, art that's all show and no substance. What Catalan has created is a paradox. It's something ordinary, yet extraordinary. Something ridiculous, yet compelling. Something insipid, yet inspired. Something worthless, yet priceless. The message of Isaiah in the early chapters comes a bit like a paradox, or certainly like a contradiction. Is it good news? Is it bad news? When we read through Isaiah, it's hard to get. In chapter 2, Isaiah seems to be saying to this broken nation of Judah that Jerusalem will yet be the center of the world. It sounds like good news. In Isaiah chapter 5, in the Song of the Vineyard, Isaiah seems to be saying there is more destruction to come. There is sadness and there is loss. It sounds like bad news. In chapters 7 and 9, Isaiah talks about a child to be born, a son to be given, the one on whose shoulders the government will rest. And of course, at the time, he's talking about the fact that King Ahaz has got a new son, Hezekiah, a sign that there will be a line of kings to continue, a sign that God is persevering with them. It looks like good news. And somehow, holding all this together, there is a common message. A message that says, He will come. He will come. God will come. And God is keeping His promises. God is keeping His promises. And this is both bad news and good news. So why, you might ask, why is this bad news? Why is it bad news that God is keeping His promises? Well, the thing is that Isaiah is telling us that God is fuming, God is furious, and God is fiercely fighting for the oppressed, the abused, and the victims of violence in all nations. And that includes the nation of Judah. You see, the people who are meant to know better are doing no better, and they will not be let off the hook. Back at Mount Sinai with Moses, God made a covenant with his people. He made a promise that they would be his people and he would be their God. But it was a conditional promise. It would hold as long as the people were obedient, as long as they exclusively loved and trusted God. And then God would bless them as his people. But if God's people were disobedient to what God wanted, they wouldn't be blessed. They would experience the curse of the consequences of those actions. That was the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, or the Sinaitic covenant is sometimes called. And right now in Judah, what's happening is some people are just ignoring God. And other people are there worshipping God, but with no regard for the oppressed and the poor. And the leaders of the nation, they're not taking any responsibility. And for God is keeping his promises. And it's bad news. But it's also good news. How is it good news? Well, that wasn't the only promise God made with his people. God also made another promise. And unlike the first promise, which was a bit like a treaty, where parties agreed to each do the thing that they agreed to, this other promise was more like a grant. God makes a commitment on his own terms to the line of King David, that there will always be someone on the throne of King David, that line will be eternal. And the thing is, that promise is unconditional. That promise stands because of God's faithfulness. It stands whatever the people do. So what's going to happen next? What's going to win out the day here? Is it bad news or is it good news? And Isaiah is there and he's wrestling with this paradox that it is both somehow. That somehow God is going to do something, but it's not clear what that will be. But that God will keep his promise. And of course what Isaiah is handling is the great paradox. What you have is God's perfect justice and God's unfailing mercy. God's righteousness and God's faithfulness. And this paradox reminds us that there are no easy answers. This paradox reminds us that we always have to go way further back in the past and way further forward in the future if we want to make sense of what God is doing in the now. It is a paradox that reminds us that we are talking about the God of history, the one who was and is to come. And at this point in the story, King Ahaz starts to realize he should have persevered with God. He's put his trust in the wrong place. And even teaming up with the biggest empire of the day will not thwart God's plans and promises for his creation. At this point, the outlook is grim. The forests burn, the oceans groan, and there is dead wood on the throne of David. We're looking at this image of a stump, lifeless, seemingly useless. And it's at this point that the prophet speaks. A shoot will come from the stump of Jesse. New life and growth from the roots. Because out of the unfailing mercy of God comes the anointed one of God. And he paints a breathtaking picture. When the anointed one comes, the Spirit of God will rest on him, the sevenfold Spirit of God. When the anointed one comes, he will delight in the fear of the Lord. When the anointed one comes, he will not judge by hearsay and illusion. He cannot be hoodwinked. He cannot be hustled. He cannot be handled. When the anointed one comes, he won't react. He will respond. With righteousness, he will judge the needy. With justice, he will decide for the poor. When the anointed one comes, he will not find the answers in military solutions, but through the irrepressible voice of the divine. When the anointed one comes, he will wear the paradox, righteousness and faithfulness around his waist. When the anointed one comes, that which was divided will start to come together. Wolf and lamb, leopard and goat, lion and calf, child and cobra. And that of which we were afraid might come alongside that for which we were afraid. I don't know about you, but I need to hear that this morning in the light of this week. It's good to persevere, but there are some things that simply I cannot go on doing anymore. And one of those things is trying to live life in a way that seeks to kind of shut out the things that I dislike or that I fear. Try and create a world where I only speak with those I agree with and don't hear different voices. I cannot persevere in a life that refuses to get real and recognize those things of which I'm afraid, that I might live with them. When the anointed one comes, that which we hope and that which we fear come out into the open and meet and make peace. And when the Anointed One comes, he won't struggle to keep the peace. He owns the peace. He brings the peace. He is the peace. And the world starts to change. And the world starts to look like a place where the vulnerable are safe. It starts to look like a place where children can play and explore and lead. It starts to hold communities where those that are scattered are brought back together. It looks like a creation that is cherished and nurtured and cared for. Painful inevitabilities give way to impossible possibilities when the Anointed One comes. When the Anointed One comes. And I want to tell you, when the Anointed One comes, he will uphold that seemingly impossible treaty between God and his people. And yet he will be treated as one who didn't. He will be lifted up and propped up like a banana on the wall. Ridiculous, yet compelling. Worthless, yet priceless. Righteous and faithful. The one in whom all of God's promises are held together. And for the hopes and fears of all the years, he has come. He will come. And you better believe he is